I am limited with what I hear, but yeah, it's a little ironic when you schedule a keynote to talk about the resources that are available from the US government, and then the government shuts down and that resource can't talk to you. So you've just sometimes have to kind of laugh at the irony and just kind of move on. We did have a chance to meet together before the shutdown, and we talked about the topic at length to prepare. Um, it was going to be great, but I'll do my best to give the information that Ernesto had outlined that he was going to cover.
Good job, Robert.
He obviously he obviously is the expert on this as the cybersecurity state coordinator for Texas for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is the CISA. They have all the government resources to bear, and they support the other three-letter agencies with different things. And so one of the things that I was recounting to Ernesto is that I always follow along with the advisories that they publish and use them as little miniature case studies or tabletops and put myself in the same situation and just walk through, okay, how would this have fared in my organization? How would things have worked? And so I want to cover one of those right now. This was actually published from CISA back in September, and it was titled Lessons Learned from a Cybersecurity Incident. And they were brought in to another government agency who had a breach. They had brought CISA in as their forensic assistant to help them respond. And this publication that they published, the advisory, walked through not only what the incident was, but what went wrong, what led to it. And then the nice thing that's a little bit of a treat when you're running a program where you're always trying to tune your tools is these advisories include all the indicators of compromise. They include the commands that were run, how the adversary moved through the environment. Did they set up camp and lay off the land? Did they bring in something real innovative? And this one, it was released end of September. They didn't say which agency it was, but it was an interesting kind of a digest into this compromise where they walked through how the attackers moved through, and it was really nothing groundbreaking with the attack. They had used Burp Suite, they checked the outside web interfaces, they somehow got on one of the machines, they set up command control, they moved around the environment, and eventually they were caught. Nothing really groundbreaking at all, but when you start looking at what enabled them to move through, and this is where things start to get interesting and we can start asking questions, and it gets into the heart of what I wanted to sit here and talk with Ernesto about today is the three key takeaways that CISA had from this analysis they provided. One was that vulnerabilities were not promptly remediated. So they were able to identify on the machines that were taken over where they had published vulnerabilities and they just weren't closed. And those are what ultimately led to somebody taking over in this environment. There were some criticals that were more than 11 days old, and the geo server that was compromised had 25 days access. Now, in the grand scheme of things, 25 days sitting with a vulnerability, sometimes it's challenging to close those, and it causes you to think through, what am I doing enough to really get in front of these type of attacks? The other thing that happened is that no one ran through the incident response plan. And as the CISA was brought in, there were all sorts of challenges with getting them access to their environment. They weren't able to get into the SIM. They weren't able to get remote access into the other agency. And it took quite a while to get the two organizations to where they were coordinated and working together. And then the last thing that they had as a key takeaway was that their EDR, their antivirus, had picked up the tools and the things that were running, and no one was reviewing the logs. And so it sat for 3 weeks before anybody noticed that the log had picked up on some of these actions. And as you sit and look at these things, it was interesting to talk with Ernesto about it, because these are problems that all of us see at some time or another. We have a process, we have a tool, we have someone on our staff that's looking at something, and you're always trying to run through the playbook and say, okay, are we meeting our SLAs? Are we doing the things we need to do? And we had a conversation about it, and it was, okay, so these things happened in this environment. What is the key takeaway? What is the thing that we can talk about today for the typical business that's out there in the United States that is trying to do the best they can with what they have? And through that conversation with Ernesto, we started talking about detective films and comparing older black and white films with the CSI or the new cutting edge things where they have every single tool in their van, and they can connect to every closed circuit camera in a 5-mile radius, less than 20 seconds, where we all know that just getting your own film footage from your own closed circuit systems can sometimes take a while to get. And the thing that comes out of it is the detective work hasn't changed. The grit, the determination, the effort to look through the data that is out there and really come to what is going on is the same. What has changed is the tools and the techniques that the adversaries are using and the data feeds that we, as the practitioners, have available. And what changes over time is, as we listen to these lessons learned and as we look at the trends that are in the environment, is adjusting what we're doing so that we are staying in line with how the adversary is trying to play. So with that in mind, looking at what CISA has published fairly recently, they make several resources available, and one of them is these trends and industry outlooks and the emerging technology, and what are they seeing, as a government agency with access into this. So the current trends that they're seeing for the last year for critical infrastructure is ransomware targeting OT, supply chain compromise, targeting unpatched legacy devices, and identity-based attacks leveraging MFA misconfigurations. None of that is surprising. These are things that, if you've been following this industry for the last decade or so, these are what everybody has been talking about and working towards with critical infrastructure. The only real difference we're seeing is just the speed at which these attacks are coming, but the mechanisms is all the same. For small businesses, talking with CISA, trends over the last year, no surprise, it's ransomware, it's business email compromise, and it's DDoS attacks. These are things that we all deal with. DDoS attacks not as frequently as ransomware and business email compromise. But when you talk about this and you read these insights, sometimes it's this big letdown, because it's like, okay, well, these are the same things we've been fighting for years. It's a well-worn list. But when you dig into the details of how these are being implemented, that's where things start to get a little interesting. I had a question come in off the thing. What is a DDoS attack? That is a distributed denial of service. That's where you flood a network port or an IP address to cause something to appear to go down. And a lot of times people will fail over to another service to try to keep things working, and that's when you can get in kind of around some of the controls.
Susan, we often don't see those in small business attacks. It's usually like nation states. Like you see a lot of this between, like, Russia and Ukraine might do that to each other to try to disrupt. communications or their ability to operate. But we do see them in corporations at a larger size, a larger scale, definitely e-commerce sites, but not as often on small business compared to the business email compromise attacks or ransomware.
Yeah, thanks, James. And getting into
You're welcome, Robert.
what we are hearing from CISA and other agencies for how these attacks are evolving. And that's where we're seeing AI starting to really lower the barrier for the adversaries to increase their frequency and complexity of their attacks. So what we're seeing is the ransomware attacks are evolving way faster than in years past. So the toolkits that are available for companies to either download or the time it takes to develop, they're getting to a point where they are evolving so that every attack is using slightly different code, much easier to evade detection when you're looking at fingerprints. They've got different tooling in place that can set it up to where the scripts and the emails that go with it are completely different, and so it's harder to fingerprint where they're coming from and which group you're really working with, which makes it harder to try to predict their actions. Also, what's changing is with the deepfake audio. We had talked earlier today about some of the more pedestrian attacks that try to trick people into buying gift cards and sending, the Apple code to these attackers, or doing different things like that. Where now we're seeing where not only are they trying to trick companies to wire money, but they'll have an out-of-band connection. So they'll have somebody pretend to be a CFO and then have a person emulating that voice call that person and say, hey, really needing you to do this, to where it seems like an out-of-band confirmation that you're dealing with the right person. And they're going around a lot of our controls that we've set up to say, okay, well, if we've got a request that's out of the normal, you've got to talk to a person directly to validate that it's a real request. So what we're seeing is things are changing, and what used to become science fiction is becoming commonplace these days. We're also seeing more advanced threat actors living off the land. This is kind of a new term, but it's really how things used to be. Used to be when you would get into a system, you look at what tools are there and you do what you could. We went through a renaissance with hacking several years ago, where very sophisticated rootkits and toolkits were being sold that allowed people to really move and set up these command and control environments. What we're seeing evolve over this past 12 to 18 months is more and more attackers are not using as many tool sets. They're really using what's available on the machine or native commands, and trying to really evade these detections of things being brought into these environments. Sometimes it limits what they can do, and so you really need to look at your golden images as you're setting up these machines, and restrict what toolkits are on them. But it's an interesting battle to fight when they're using the very tools that you need to manage the network when they're using it against you. I had already mentioned the OT ransomware trend that a lot of us have kind of heard about in the news, with either power or water or other utilities being disrupted. But what's interesting is we're seeing that the traditional strategy of isolation and containment for these critical systems is falling by the wayside, and these same legacy systems are being coupled with modern IT, things that are exposing new vulnerable ways of attacking these legacy systems. So we're having what used to be very isolated control systems moving to the cloud so that they have redundancy and support. But then now we've got these cloud attacks that can then do lateral movement and get into these systems that used to be just cut off. And so it really shouldn't be a surprise that this is an area ripe with innovation. But if we even look back at Stuxnet, it was developed as a virus that would utilize USB transmission in a time when these ICS controllers were really not utilizing USB, but it was written in such a way that it only activated when it hit devices with a known serial number range. This is back when people were not ubiquitously using USB devices. So it's the demonstration throughout time that people will change and use new technology. It's nothing new. What we're seeing now is that the rate of that change is just drastically increasing. The other insight that CISA offered for how things are changing and new developing fields is something called hybrid warfare. So we've heard in the news a lot about cyber warfare and countries that are using it as a way of either disrupting other countries or getting different things to happen that are in their way. What we're seeing, especially in Ukraine, is where both sides are leveraging every possible technology they can find, and each side is just stepping up the ladder and figuring out a way how to stop it, and then they try something new and the other side figures out a way to stop it. And what we're hearing from the government agencies is that in the future, if something were to happen, we're not necessarily going to see the large infrastructure disrupted by this cyber warfare. We're going to see things, not only the critical infrastructure, but also think about healthcare, gas stations, part suppliers, local public services. All of these play a big role in the local economies. And you disrupt the food, you disrupt the fuel, it's going to be a large scale disruption, have a huge impact on all of us. So as a government entity, the CISA provides a lot of publicly available resources for us in the trenches. And we, um, we need to keep our eye on what we're doing and look to the new data. So one of the things that, and I know this is just sounding like a huge advertisement for CISA, I'm trying to be true to kind of what we talked with Ernesto about, but it's talking with them, and they not only have the resources with policies and with frameworks, but they also provide different resources to help each of us think through our programs, think through what's next. And talking with them and looking at, well, what could we do in near term kind of mitigation for our program if we're trying to build out something that's more resilient. The first recommendation was implementing phishing resistant MFA. Um, and talking with them about that, it's the text-based messages and the app-based one-time passwords. They're great. They're amazingly more secure than just passwords, but they're still susceptible and not impervious to compromise. And so what the recommendation is for your critical accounts, for systems that just really need to keep the lights on, moving to a form of MFA that goes back to the three pieces of identity. And so if you look at what identity actually is, it's something you know, typically a password, something you have, it's like a badge, maybe could be a certificate, could be a YubiKey, something like that, or something you are, a fingerprint, a hand scan, facial recognition. Anytime you've got multiple pieces of that, you are moving away from something that can easily be stolen. So if it's something that you physically have, somebody would physically have to have access to it. That would be why they're recommending these phishing resistant MFAs. And so that's where getting Microsoft Hello or getting YubiKeys or certificate things, the government uses the ID cards that have to slide in the computers. This is where you are moving into something that people cannot break through. So that was their first recommendation. The second is conducting tabletop exercises. It's looking at the process, looking at your procedures, and then running through and testing them, trying it out, having different parts of the organization involved. Their recommendation is to test it with key people, and to also test it with those key people not being involved, as if somebody is out sick or traveling or just not otherwise not available. How do things work? Also highlighted in the advisory I was talking about earlier is how easy can you bring in forensics? How easy can third-party companies, your people that need to assist you, can they be brought in to do the work? Once you're able to test that and run through, maybe you need to do a data dump if you're not going to allow them access to your log sources. How long does that take to run? You need to build these into your timetables and have the SLA set up so that you know if something happens, the business immediately knows, okay, it's going to be 28 hours before we can get data to a forensic company once we engage them. It helps set with the business the expectations of what is acceptable and what the business can survive, which is a different aspect of these tabletops that don't always get into with just worrying about turning the computers back on. The other is looking for vulnerabilities. CSA was highlighting the need for doing vulnerability scanning. I know here at Center, we have a robust patching program that we use, but we still use vulnerability scanning to find holes that aren't quite getting the attention that they should. And we use that to continually improve the base process. So looking at your patching program, are you thinking about your third-party software? Are you having enough data feeds to know when something needs to be applied? Playing through that, using vulnerability scanning to help inform that process improvement, so that you know that you're not just leaving yourself vulnerable to the next person who tries to knock on the door. The fourth thing that CSA was recommending is to engage external advisors to enhance your program. There are tons of resources available to get information about how to improve your process. And it's better to test your capabilities so that you know what you have and where your shortfalls are, so that you also know how to appropriately engage outside advisors, whether that is going to conferences, attending web conferences like this, talking to CISA, which you can always talk to your regional advisor with them, or engaging companies like us to come in and share with you with what we're seeing. Getting outside opinion helps turn over the rocks that may have been kind of covered up with just keeping the business running down to down. So beyond doing these near-term kind of fixes, I was talking with Ernesto on this. I was reading through some advisories, and it's like, okay, what can we really do from a long term to fix the actual problems, to move the needle, to get our things going that aren't easy? And the number one item that was recommended was for business to invest in a secure by design or security by default development practice. So if you've talked with me individually, I've always brought up security by design. It's a different way of looking at SDLC. What it is it's a theory about every step in the process for any time you have a project or an initiative that touches data to involve some sort of input from the security department. And that is, you're going to improve a website, you're going to bring in a new ERP, you're going to engage with a new vendor, you're going to implement a new version of a software. What data does that touch? How do we think about it and advise the project team to build out the solution, build out the support processes in a way that incorporates security throughout the whole process, instead of bringing something to development, bringing it to production, doing your vulnerability scans and your pen tests on it, and then realize you've got to do a follow-on project afterwards to fix those holes. So that was the first recommendation from CISA, was building that secure by design philosophy into your project. The other thing that they brought up, that the next thing you can do is, I know it's a little bit of a dry subject, but looking at security frameworks that are being developed and build controls based on the frameworks so that you can establish governance on these newer policies and kind of have the technology fully developed before it's really adopted by your business. One example I can give is the NIST AI risk management framework. that came out recently. It highlights how you measure risk and how you look at AI in the environment. And I had talked earlier with my discussion with Baba on setting up the governance, on looking through how do we empower the company to have champions throughout the environment rather than just pushing it from one central place on high. And very much so using these frameworks as a way to think through what are the powers that be thinking about, who are the leaders in industry saying that we should do, and then what does that mean for us? How do we make it relevant for our company? And use that as a way to guide and set up your roadmap so that you're building the right guardrails for your organization. At the end of the day, you will still need to do the hard work for these policies and the governance you set up. There are a lot of tools that are available that are federally funded and no cost. Went on the CISA website on that. So they've got different resources you can have available. They've got cyber hygiene scanning, which is what they call their external vulnerability scans, the web application testing. There's ransomware readiness assessments that they have available where you can download a template and walk through. There's cyber resilience reviews where it's these templates that help you talk through and think through how resilient you are to these events happening, which get more into the business continuity planning. And there's also where you can talk to a cybersecurity advisor with the CSA. And so there's regional cybersecurity advisors. The majority of the people on this call are going to be in Region 6, where you can sit down and talk with them. They also have hosted CISA workshops and exercises and training programs. And if you happen to be an SLTT, a state and local, tribal, or territorial government, they have no cost consulting and tooling that's additional and grants as well for those government entities. So I know this has been extremely heavy on what CISA has to offer. And it's really unfortunate Ernesto couldn't be in person to share his wisdom with the stuff that he is dealing with at his level. Really great insight. I just wanted to bring that information to you. And so it isn't just the CISA. NIST has a lot of information available. CIS, which is the Center for Internet Security, has a lot of guidelines and standards that you can apply to your systems. InfraGard, if you're in one of the industries that's tied with critical infrastructure, a great way to be connected with the FBI, see the notices that they publish, get advisories on how to deal with things, get lists of indicators of compromise that you can plug into your tooling. There's a whole other list or set of resources available to find your templates and guides. And I've been hearing a bunch of dinging while I've been talking here and going through my notes on everything I talked with Ernesto about. Ali, I went crazy fast. James, do we have any questions that have popped up that I may have glossed over?
Oh yeah. No, there's been a lot of chiming in about how I'm picking up maybe some new friends in the chat. I might have a new roommate for the future. No, I think there are a couple of comments I'd love to just add in there. Part of this session on this topic is about the 2025 outlook. Every year, I'm sure the guys on the bridge right now, they get these reports that, hey, here's what in January, here's what 2025's outlook is. And then come end of year, some of those things came to fruition, some of them did not. One of the things I saw get hammered on this year were groups like Center get nailed by attacks. So the groups that Center or other MSPs use, like ConnectWise, Kaseya, Enable, all those groups were attacked. Can you talk a little bit, Robert, on that risk of how indirectly your partner ecosystem that you rely on might be impacting you directly?
Yeah, and so this is something that it's a very scary thing when you start to talk about it. When you get a trusted partner that really enables your business to move forward quickly, there's a level of trust that has to be with that partner that They're going to make their service available, and it's going to be reliable. There's a really good case study um, of an attack affecting the industry. So for car dealerships, they have a dealer management system that where they run the car loans, they run their inventory. If they're importing from overseas, that's how they deal with customs. The CRM is inside of it, everything. And they really have made it to where these dealerships are able to run their systems without having to have a lot of systems on site. They're all SaaS solutions. There's only 2 or 3 big players. One of them is CDK, and they had a ransomware incident that was happened this summer. Um, their US systems went down with ransomware, and it completely took out the operations of 15,000 car dealerships for a little over a month. And so there was over a month this past summer that dealerships just weren't able to import cars. They weren't able to close deals. They weren't able to interact with the banks for loans. And so when you have a supply chain issues like this, so I'll bring it back to center here in a second. But when you've got a supply chain situation like this for a dealership where they're no longer able to sign contracts because that's how they were doing contracts, they're not able to do all of the things that they really need to do because a trusted advisor went down. It really hurt the industry, and it made it to where people really scrambled for what are the manual processes I can do to do that. So when we bring it back to somebody like Center, where we were advised, hey, these supply chain attacks are going to be ramped up this year. We've definitely seen an increase of the external fingerprints and touching and scanning of our systems and looking. People are definitely looking more than they have in years past. The trick is having enough diversification in your tooling so you're not relying on a single supply chain provider. So if one of our SaaS solutions goes down, we still need to have an understanding that we're still able to pivot over to another solution and keep operating. And so anytime you're dealing with an external vendor that's taking over a whole bunch of critical business processes, you need to really understand, are they a true partner in the industry? Are they really at the table with you and trying to make sure you're successful as well? Or are they going to go down and just say, sorry, there's nothing we can do, you're just dead? We've been very fortunate that our tooling and our observations have been good enough that we've caught all the knocking on the door that we've known about and prevented anything from impacting at a big scale. But it's that the supply chain attacks, as more companies move to these integrated SaaS solutions, are going to increase in frequency and impact.
Yeah, that was good, Robert. I agree. You heard in 2021 about Colonial Pipeline, about JBS Foods. Everyone, of course, thought that was going to impact everybody indirectly. SolarWinds was a supply chain attack where every IT guy did the right thing by adding a patch that ended up letting the bad guy in. CrowdStrike just last year, the largest outage that we'd ever seen. We've been able at Center to kind of dodge a lot of these. Some of that's due to just following best practices. Some of that's luck.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, is there any advice you have for the small business that says, I want to be able to budget for what this would look like if something were to hit me? How would you start that process?
Yeah, and so that's where your incident response planning really, at this point, you cannot responsibly do that without including business continuity planning. We are at a point with technology where it's almost impossible to do your job without the technology. We've gone past the days where there were still enough paper processes. Earlier today, I had kind of joked about the people that were blessed to be in the hurricane zone because we have to live with these power outages that come every couple of years. If you're going down this path and you're thinking through these supply chain risks, it's okay, if I'm going to offload this process, do I have some sort of manual process to go with it? How long can my business operate? So if I'm moving widgets, what is my working capital and how much inventory do I carry? How many days of inventory do I carry that I could ship if the system goes down? I was helping a factory several years back work on this, and we had full segmentation on everything, but they used SAP for doing serial numbers, and they could not print serial number labels without SAP working up. And they had an SAP outage shortly after we had highlighted this for them, and their factory completely stopped because of that one key process. And the way around it is they made a process to where at the beginning of a shift, they would print out 12 hours worth of serial numbers for 8 hours worth of work. So if they were down, they had 12 hours to bring SAP back up before it would actually impact the factory. And so as we're working through these incident response plans, it's what can the business tolerate and what kind of risk are we willing to carry? And you build that into your incident response plan, set up those and saying, okay, if we have an outage, security team can deal with it. But if you can't bring it up and you don't think you're going to be able to bring it up in 20 hours, then we've got to bring in outside help and we've got to do something else, because that's when it's going to start impacting the business. So what we're seeing a lot is helping and talking customers through, okay, what is your risk tolerance? What can you bring up? And then making sure that they're trained on that incident response process. Because we've got our incident response process, we can triage it, we can figure it out, get things back working, but we're not running the business, we're keeping the IT lights on. So how does the business work with that? How do they then translate that to their stakeholders in the various divisions? And it's that handoff between the two groups working. When it's successful, that's when these things are way less painful.
Yeah, and I would argue too with like some of our security partners. Let's pick like Arctic Wolf, for example, who like to talk about that blast radius and how to reduce it. If we can identify ways to limit the potential of impacting the full business and have it be something that if hit, it'll always be limited to just a silo or a small, like a single system. Sure is easy for us to talk about those repairs or business continuity strategies when it's not the full org. CrowdStrike would have been a little tougher during its outage to hope for that type of incident. So even Robert, deeper than just discussing an outage would be how do you take care of every scenario when the scenarios are changing so fast, which I say all that to say just before this event, you were talking to me about, even though the world's evolving so fast, how we get out of hot water is really not changed all that much. It's the same analysis, similar tools to restore from backups to launch the business in a segregated environment. Those things haven't really changed so much.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Couldn't agree
very much
more.
so. Well said.